In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where apex predators rule through fear and strength, where the weak are consumed and the strong dominate, there exists a universal truth that has held for millions of years. Silence equals weakness, and weakness invites death. Every sentient species across the cosmos has learned this lesson through blood and bone. The Kithara, with their razor-sharp claws, announce their presence with bone-chilling howls. The Vorthak signal their dominance through electromagnetic pulses that can be felt across star systems. The Zilani mark their territory with pheromone clouds that scream of danger to any who dare approach. But sometimes, in the deepest corners of space, in the most unlikely of places, the universe reveals its most dangerous secret. The quietest ones are often the most lethal. On transport vessel Nexus 7, carrying delegates from across the galaxy to the most important peace summit in galactic history, something sits in the last seat, something that doesn't roar, doesn't posture, doesn't threaten, something that simply observes. The predators have noticed. Their instincts, honed by eons of evolution, are screaming warnings, but they've made one critical mistake. They think silence means prey. They're about to learn why humanity earned its place among the stars not through the loudest roar, but through the most terrifying whisper. We are here. Welcome to a tale where the last shall be first, where the silence shall speak volumes, and where the galaxy's most feared predators will discover that Earth's children learn to hunt in a very different kind of darkness. The transport vessel Nexus 7 cut through the void between star systems like a blade through silk, its massive hull gleaming with the light of distant suns. Inside its luxurious passenger compartment, representatives from 17 different species sat in carefully arranged seating, each positioned according to their civilization status in the Galactic Confederation. At the front, the Kithara delegation occupied the prime seats, their reptilian forms draped in ceremonial armor that clinked with every breath. Their leader, Warlord Scarix, periodically released low growls that made the air itself vibrate with menace. Behind them sat the Vorthak contingent, their crystalline bodies pulsing with internal light that cast eerie shadows across the cabin walls. Their ambassador, Kor Mindjawlith, emitted subsonic frequencies that made several smaller species unconsciously shift away. Further back, the Zilani representatives lounged in their specially designed seats, their predatory grace evident even in repose. Pack leader Ravish's six eyes constantly scanned the cabin, cataloging threats and weaknesses with the practiced ease of a born hunter. The smaller species huddled in the middle sections, the Miratai with their delicate wings folded tight against their bodies, the Phoenix clutching their data tablets with trembling paws. And in the very last seat, in the section typically reserved for observers and minor planetary representatives, sat the human. Dr. Sarah Chen appeared unremarkable by galactic standards. No claws, no natural armor, no electromagnetic capabilities, no pack hunting adaptations. Her small frame was clothed in simple dark fabric. Her brown hair pulled back in a practical style. She held a worn paperback book in her hands, something called The Art of War, and had been reading quietly since departure 3 hours ago. The predators had noticed her immediately, of course. Their instincts demanded it. Scarix had caught her scent during boarding and had to resist the urge to bare his fangs. She smelled of potential prey, but something about her lack of fear response triggered deeper, more primitive warnings in his ancient brain. Prey that didn't run was either diseased, trapped, or far more dangerous than it appeared. Zalath's crystalline structure had resonated with harmonic frequencies when scanning the human, but the readings made no sense. Her electromagnetic signature was minimal. Her body language suggested no defensive posturing, yet something about her presence created discordance in the core mind's calculations. It was like trying to analyze a shadow. Ravesh found herself repeatedly glancing backward, her predatory instincts insisting that something was wrong with the picture. The human sat with perfect stillness, turning pages at regular intervals, never looking up, never acknowledging the dozen apex predators sharing her transport. In Ravesh's experience, only 2 types of beings acted this way, the supremely confident or the already dead. Ambassador Scarix, came a soft voice from the Phoenix delegation. Might I inquire about the human representative? Our files show minimal information about Earth's involvement in the summit. Scarix's massive head turned toward the small, fox-like being. Earth is a recent addition to the Confederation diplomat Yex. A minor world of little consequence. Their representative was granted observer status as a courtesy. Observer status? Yex's ears twitched nervously. But surely any species reaching interstellar capability must possess some notable characteristics? It was Cormine Zalith who answered, its harmonic voice filling the cabin. The humans achieve spaceflight through primitive chemical propulsion. Their world lacks any species that could challenge our weakest youth. They were granted membership more as a curiosity than a necessity. From her seat, Sarah Chen turned another page. The subtle sound drew every predatory eye in the cabin. There was something about the gesture that seemed deliberate, timed to their conversation. But when they looked, she remained focused on her book, apparently oblivious to their discussion. Their planet orbits a yellow star, Ravesh added, her pack leader instincts compelling her to fill in details. Single satellite, mostly water-covered. The dominant species shows no natural weapons, no environmental adaptations that would suggest survival challenges. They appear to have faced no significant predation during their evolution. This statement caused murmurs throughout the cabin. Every species represented had evolved under pressure from natural predators, environmental hazards, or both. It was unthinkable that intelligence could develop without such challenges. Dr. Chen reached into a small bag beside her seat and withdrew a water bottle. She took a careful sip, replaced the cap, and returned the bottle to her bag. The movements were economical, precise, and somehow drew the attention of every conscious being in the cabin. No natural predators, whispered one of the Mirathi. How did they achieve tool use? How did they develop strategic thinking? Perhaps, Scarix rumbled. They didn't. The implications of this hung heavy in the recycled air. A species that had stumbled into space travel without earning it through evolutionary pressure would be easy prey for any of the established powers. The peace summit they were all traveling to was intended to establish new territorial agreements and resource allocations. If humanity was as weak as it appeared, their small section of space could be divided among the stronger species without significant resistance. Sarah turned another page. This time, pack leader Ravesh was certain it wasn't coincidence. The human's timing was too perfect, her apparent indifference too complete to be genuine. But what could she be planning? What threat could such a small, seemingly helpless creature possibly pose? Tell me, Ambassador Scarix, Ravesh said carefully, what do we know of human military capabilities? Scarix's claws extended slightly as he accessed his briefing files. Minimal kinetic weaponry. No energy weapons of note. Their largest vessels are barely frigate class by our standards. They possess no bioweapons, no psychic capabilities, no advanced defensive systems. Their ground forces rely on projectile weapons and primitive armor. Numbers? Their entire military could be defeated by a single Cathara battle group. The predators began to relax slightly. If humanity posed no military threat, then the strange unease they felt around their representative was likely just unfamiliarity with such an apparently helpless species. But then, Sarah Chen did something that sent ice through every predatory nervous system in the cabin. She smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression, though it might have appeared so to a casual observer. It was the kind of smile a human might wear while reading about ancient battle strategies, about the ways clever generals had turned certain defeat into crushing victory through patience, planning, and the careful application of force at precisely the right moment. The smile lasted exactly 3 seconds, then faded as she turned another page. In those 3 seconds, every apex predator in the cabin felt their survival instincts scream in unison. It was a smile that said she knew something they didn't, a smile that suggested she had heard every word of their conversation and found it amusing, a smile that implied she was exactly where she wanted to be. Ambassador Yex's voice came out as barely a whisper. How long until we reach the summit station? 17 hours, replied the ship's AI. 17 hours alone in space with whatever was sitting in the last seat. For the first time in their respective species' histories, the galaxy's apex predators began to wonder if they were the ones being hunted. Sarah Chen continued reading about the importance of appearing weak when strong and strong when weak. Outside the viewports, the stars wheeled slowly past, indifferent to the growing tension aboard Nexus 7. The human chapter of galactic history was about to begin, and it would start not with a roar, but with the quiet turning of pages and the patient smile of someone who knew exactly how dangerous underestimation could be. In the depths of space, predator and prey were about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous hunters are the ones you never see coming. 6 hours into the journey, the first incident occurred. It started when Ambassador Yex excused herself to visit the refreshment station near the rear of the cabin. Her small fox-like form moved nervously between the seats, her natural prey instincts on high alert in the presence of so many predators. As she passed the human seat, she couldn't help but glance down at the book Dr. Chen was reading. The page was open to a chapter titled, "All Warfare is Based on Deception." Yex's step faltered, her natural curiosity overcoming her fear. "Excuse me," she said softly, "I couldn't help but notice your reading material. Is this some form of entertainment?" Sarah looked up for the first time since boarding, her brown eyes meeting Yex's amber ones. When she spoke, her voice was gentle, almost musical. "In a way, yes, though I suppose it depends on your perspective. It's a study of conflict resolution through strategic thinking." "Conflict resolution?" Yex's ears perked forward. "Your species has developed peaceful solutions to warfare?" "Oh no," Sarah replied with that same unsettling smile. "This particular book is about 2,500 years old, but the principles remain sound." The conversation had drawn the attention of several nearby passengers. Coremind Jolith's harmonic frequency shifted to a more focused scanning pattern, while Pack Leader Ravash's 6 eyes fixed on the human with renewed intensity. 2,500 years? Yex whispered. "Your species was writing about warfare when most of us were still developing basic tool use." Sarah nodded pleasantly. "We've always been quick learners when it comes to conflict. We had to be. Our world taught us some very harsh lessons about survival." Warlord Scarix had been listening with growing interest.
"I was informed that your world lacked significant predators."
"How does this align with your claims of harsh survival lessons?" Sarah closed her book, keeping her finger on the page she'd been reading. "Who told you we lacked predators, Ambassador?" "That's a curious misconception. Our intelligence briefings were quite clear," Scarix replied, his reptilian head tilting in a gesture of dominant interrogation. "No large carnivores, no environmental hazards comparable to our homeworlds." "Ah!" Sarah said, understanding dawning in her voice. "You were looking for the wrong kind of predator." The cabin had grown noticeably quieter. Even the smaller species had stopped their nervous chittering to listen to this exchange. "What do you mean, Dr. Chia?" "Chen," Ravesh interjected, her pack leader instincts demanding clarification of a potential threat. Sarah stood smoothly, her movements economical and precise. She was shorter than most beings in the cabin, yet somehow her presence seemed to fill more space than her small frame should have allowed. "You're all apex predators from your respective worlds," she said conversationally. "You evolved claws, fangs, electromagnetic abilities, pack coordination, crystalline armor. You developed these traits because your environments contained threats that required such adaptations." She paused, letting this sink in. "But what happens when the primary threat on your world isn't other predators? What happens when the most dangerous thing you can encounter is another member of your own species?" The silence in the cabin became absolute. "Impossible," Coremind Zalith harmonized. "Intraspecies predation is limited by recognition systems, pack dynamics, territorial behaviors, but humans are persistence hunters, not ambush predators. We're endurance runners, not sprinters. We're tool users who turned every object into a potential weapon and every landscape into a potential trap." She opened her book again, finding a particular passage. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. That's from this book. We wrote it because we needed to understand how to defeat opponents who were faster, stronger, and better armed than we were. Other humans, Yex breathed. Other humans, Sarah confirmed. For most of our history, the greatest threat to any human wasn't wild animals or natural disasters. It was other humans who had learned to be better at hunting, better at warfare, better at survival. Scarix's claws extended involuntarily. You're saying your species evolved to prey upon itself? I'm saying we evolved to survive each other. Do you know what that creates, Ambassador? It creates a species that can adapt to any hunting style, any predatory strategy, any form of conflict. Because we faced all of them before. Sarah moved to the refreshment station, her walk casual but somehow purposeful. Every eye in the cabin tracked her movement. You see, when your primary evolutionary pressure is competition with your own species, you don't develop bigger claws or thicker armor. You develop something far more dangerous. The ability to think like your opponent, to predict their strategies, to turn their strengths against them. Your briefings were correct that Earth lacks large predators, she continued. We killed them all, not in some ancient prehistoric era, but throughout our history. Saber-toothed cats, cave bears, giant wolves, we systematically eliminated every species that posed a threat to us. Sarah added a small amount of honey, but that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is how we did it. We didn't overpower them. We studied them, learned their patterns, exploited their weaknesses. We fought the most successful predators in Earth's history and won not through strength, but through superior strategy. Core Mind Zalith's harmonic frequencies had shifted to what could only be described as distress patterns. This is impossible. Such extensive intra-species competition would prevent civilization from developing. Would it? Sarah asked, returning to her seat. Or would it create the most adaptable, most strategically sophisticated species in the galaxy? Know your enemy and know yourself, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles. We learned to know ourselves very, very well, Ambassador. Every weakness, every strength, every pattern of behavior that could be exploited. The implications of this statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Pack leader Ravesh spoke first, her voice carefully controlled. You're suggesting that humanity's peaceful integration into the Confederation is deceptive. I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah replied mildly. I'm simply noting that your assumptions about human nature appear to be based on incomplete information. She turned another page, and several passengers actually flinched at the sound. For instance, you assumed that our lack of natural weapons made us weak, but tool use eliminates the need for claws when you can craft better ones from metal. You assumed our lack of armor made us vulnerable. But mobility and intelligence are often superior to heavy defensive capabilities. Scarix's breathing had become noticeably heavier. What exactly are you implying, human? Sarah looked up from her book, and for the first time her expression was completely serious. I'm not implying anything, Warlord Scarix. I'm stating a fact. Every species in this cabin evolved to be an apex predator in their environment. But humans evolved to be apex predators of apex predators. She closed her book with a soft snap. We learned to hunt the hunters, and we got very, very good at it. The cabin systems registered a sudden drop in temperature as environmental controls struggled to compensate for the stress-induced heat signatures of dozens of terrified beings. In the last seat, Dr. Sarah Chen smiled politely and opened her book to a chapter titled The Use of Spies. Outside the viewports, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the revelation that Earth's children had learned to hunt in the darkness between worlds. Every species in the cabin found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the small human reading quietly in the last seat. Conversations had dwindled to nervous whispers, and even the most confident predators found themselves glancing repeatedly toward Dr. Chen. It was Cormind Jaleth who finally broke the uncomfortable silence. Dr. Chen, the crystalline being harmonized, its frequencies carefully modulated to appear non-threatening. Your revelation about human evolutionary pressures is enlightening. However, I find myself curious about the practical applications of such development. Surely academic understanding of conflict and actual capability are different matters. Sarah looked up from her book where she had been reading about something called psychological warfare. Her expression remained pleasantly neutral. Would you like a demonstration? The word demonstration sent ripples of alarm through every nervous system in the cabin. That won't be necessary, Skarks rumbled quickly. Oh, but I think it would be educational, Sarah said, standing and moving to the center of the cabin. You see, there's been an underlying assumption in our conversation that I think we should address. Everyone here has been operating under the belief that this is a random group of delegates traveling to a peace summit. But is it really random? Pack leader Ravash's 6 eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that this particular transport contains representatives from exactly 17 species. 17 species that, according to galactic records, have territorial disputes with Earth's neighboring systems. 17 species that have filed formal complaints about human expansion into their traditional hunting grounds. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop another degree. That's merely coincidence, Ambassador Yek stammered. Is it? Sarah asked gently. Let me share some interesting statistics I've memorized during our journey. She began walking slowly between the seats, her movement casual but somehow predatory. The Kithara hegemony has lodged 14 formal protests about human mining operations in the Kepler system. Operations that, according to your own surveys, you had deemed economically unfeasible until humans began extracting rare minerals using techniques you'd never considered. This Skarex's claws extended, scraping against his armrests. The Vorthak Collective has expressed concern about human interference with electromagnetic phenomena in 3-star systems, phenomena that you were unable to utilize until human physicists published papers on quantum resonance manipulation. Zalith's harmonic frequencies shifted to what could only be described as distress patterns. The Zalani packs have reported unauthorized human presence in hunting grounds that have been barren for centuries. Hunting grounds that somehow became rich with game after human agricultural consultants introduced what they called ecosystem restoration techniques. Ravash's predatory grace had been replaced by barely controlled tension. Sarah continued her circuit of the cabin, her voice remaining conversational despite the increasingly threatening atmosphere. In fact, every species represented here has discovered that humans possess capabilities that your initial assessments failed to identify. Mining techniques that extract resources from worthless asteroids, agricultural methods that restore dead worlds to fertility, navigation systems that find safe passage through space phenomena you considered impassable. She paused beside the Marathi delegation, their delicate wings now trembling with fear. The question isn't whether this meeting is coincidental. The question is whether I'm here as an observer or as something else entirely. What are you implying? Core Mind Zaleth demanded, its harmonic voice taking on overtones of aggression. Sarah smiled, and this time there was nothing pleasant about the expression. I'm not implying anything, Ambassador. I'm stating that this entire journey has been an intelligence-gathering operation. Every word spoken, every gesture made, every assumption revealed has been carefully documented and analyzed. She reached into her bag and withdrew what appeared to be a simple data tablet. For instance, Warlord Skarix, your species' military protocols include a mandatory threat assessment of any unknown entity. You've been unconsciously cataloging my physical capabilities, searching for weapons, evaluating my potential combat effectiveness. What you haven't realized is that I've been doing the same thing to you. Skarix's massive form tensed. That's impossible. Kithara assessment techniques are instinctual, evolved over millions of years, and human assessment techniques are learned, refined over thousands of generations of intraspecies conflict, Sarah replied. Tell me, Warlord, are you right-handed or left-handed? What relevance does that have? You favor your right side by approximately 15%. Your weight distribution, the way you gesture, even how you hold your breathing suggests a combat style designed around right-handed weapon use. Your armor bears microscopic wear patterns consistent with weapon training, specifically with curved blades approximately 1 meter in length. Scarix's breathing had become audibly labored. Everything she said was correct. Furthermore, Sarah continued, your stress responses indicate a preference for direct confrontation over ambush tactics. Your species likely evolved in open terrain where stealth was less valuable than overwhelming force. She turned to Jaleth. Core mind, your electromagnetic signatures follow predictable patterns based on emotional states. When calm, you emit at approximately 50 terahertz. When stressed, that frequency increases to nearly 75 terahertz. When preparing for combat, you unconsciously charge your crystalline matrix to approximately 89% capacity. The crystalline being's glow flickered in what might have been shock. You're currently at 91% capacity, which suggests you're not just prepared for combat, but actively considering it. Pack leader, your species exhibits classic coordinated hunting behaviors. You've been unconsciously positioned to cut off my retreat routes. Your pack has been subtly spreading to surround me, and you've been timing your breathing to synchronize with your subordinates for a coordinated strike. Raves's 6 eyes widened. How could you possibly know our hunting protocols? Because I've been watching you practice them for the past 10 hours. Sarah replied simply, human visual processing is optimized for pattern recognition and behavioral analysis. We can identify pack hunting strategies because we developed countermeasures for them millennia ago. The cabin fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. So, Sarah said, returning to her seat, let me clarify the situation. You all assumed you were traveling with a harmless observer from a primitive world. In reality, you've been sharing this space with someone who has been systematically analyzing your species' military capabilities, psychological profiles, and tactical preferences. She opened her data tablet, revealing screens full of detailed notes and tactical assessments. Every species represented here now has a complete psychological profile in Earth's strategic database. We know your strengths, your weaknesses, your preferred combat doctrines, and your species-specific vulnerabilities. Ambassador Yex's voice came out as barely a whisper. This is espionage. No, Sarah corrected gently. This is how humans say hello. She returned to her book, finding a chapter titled The 9 Situations of Ground. You see, when your species evolves through constant intra-species competition, you learn that information is the most valuable weapon. Before humans engage in any relationship, diplomatic, commercial, or military, we gather intelligence. We study, we analyze, we understand. The implications crashed over the cabin's occupants like a tsunami. How long? Scarix asked, his voice hollow. How long have you been studying us? Sarah looked up from her book, her expression genuinely curious. Oh, we've been monitoring all of your species since before we achieved interstellar travel. Radio transmissions, electromagnetic leakage, behavioral observation through long-range sensors. We've been building psychological profiles on galactic civilizations for the past 60 years. She turned a page. Did you really think we would venture into space without understanding what we might encounter? Humans don't explore. We scout. We gather intelligence. We prepare. Outside the viewports, the stars continued their ancient dance, but now they seemed less like distant lights and more like the eyes of something vast and patient watching from the darkness between worlds. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed from tension to something approaching existential dread. The galaxy's apex predators found themselves confronting the possibility that they had been prey all along, observed and catalogued by something that appeared harmless but was revealing itself to be far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. It was Ambassador Yex who finally found her voice, though it trembled with fear. Dr. Chen, if what you're saying is true, if humanity has been observing us for decades, what do you want? Sarah looked up from her book, where she had been reading about something called strategic patience. Her expression remained mild, almost sympathetic. Want? That's a fascinating question, Ambassador. What does any species want? Survival, prosperity, security for their offspring? The usual biological imperatives. But you could have remained hidden. Cormine Zalith harmonized, its frequencies betraying deep confusion. If you possessed such intelligence advantages, why reveal yourselves to the galactic community at all? Sarah closed her book and set it aside, giving the question her full attention. Because hiding forever isn't survival, Ambassador. It's just a different form of death. Humans learned long ago that the most sustainable form of security comes not from avoiding conflict, but from making conflict unprofitable for potential aggressors. She stood and moved to the large viewport that dominated one wall of the cabin, gazing out at the starfield beyond. You see, every species here has been asking the wrong question. You've been wondering how dangerous humans might be. The real question is, how dangerous do we need to be? Pack leader Ravash's hunting instincts compelled her to seek clarification. Explain. Gladly. Sarah turned back to face the cabin. Let's consider our current situation. 17 apex predator species, all with territorial disputes with humanity. All traveling to a peace summit where those disputes will be resolved. All convinced that humans are weak enough to be easily displaced or conquered. She began walking again, her movements somehow more purposeful than before. Now, from humanity's perspective, we have several options. We could arrive at the summit with overwhelming military force, demonstrate our true capabilities, and intimidate everyone into submission. That's the Kythara approach, isn't it, Warlord Scarix? Scarix's massive form shifted uncomfortably. Superior strength ensures peace through deterrence. Or we could attempt to outmaneuver everyone politically, form alliances, play species against each other until we emerge as the dominant power. That would be more in line with Zalani pack tactics, wouldn't it, Pack Leader Ravesh? Coordinated strategy maximizes successful outcomes. Absolutely. Or we could demonstrate technological superiority, use advanced capabilities to make resistance futile. The Vorthak approach to conflict resolution. Cormine Zaleth's glow flickered. Overwhelming technical advantage prevents unnecessary violence. All excellent strategies. All time-tested approaches that have served your species well. But humans learned something different during our evolutionary development. She returned to her seat, but instead of sitting, she remained standing, somehow commanding the attention of every being in the cabin despite her small stature. We learned that the most effective victory is the one where your opponent defeats themselves. The silence that followed this statement was profound. Consider what has happened on this journey. Sarah continued. 17 species that view humans as weak potential prey have spent the past 10 hours discovering that their assumptions were incorrect. Not through demonstrations of force, not through technological displays, not through political maneuvering. Through conversation. Ambassador Yex's ears flattened against her head. You manipulated us. Did I? Sarah asked gently. Or did I simply provide accurate information and allow you to reach logical conclusions? She gestured to encompass the cabin. Every revelation I've shared has been factual. Human evolutionary pressures, our history of intra-species conflict, our intelligence-gathering capabilities, our strategic patience. I haven't threatened anyone, demonstrated any weapons, or made any demands. The truth of this statement was undeniable, which somehow made it more disturbing. Yet every predator in this cabin now views humanity as a potential threat rather than potential prey. Why? Because you've realized that your initial assessments were based on incomplete information. Cormine Zaleth's harmonic frequencies had shifted to what could only be described as resigned understanding. You've demonstrated that human intelligence capabilities are superior to our security protocols. I've demonstrated that humans think about conflict differently than any species you've encountered. We don't just prepare for war, we prepare for the war after the war, and the one after that. She opened her data tablet again, scrolling through screens of information. For instance, this peace summit isn't really about territorial disputes, is it? It's about testing human resolve. Several species have been coordinating to present united opposition to human expansion, believing that overwhelming political pressure would force us to accept subordinate status in the galactic hierarchy. Scarrick's claws scraping against his armrests was the only sound in the cabin. The Kythera-Vorthak-Solani alliance has been in development for 6 months, with the goal of dividing human space among your 3 civilizations. The smaller species have been promised protection in exchange for supporting the initiative. How could you possibly know about classified military planning? Sarah's smile returned, and this time it was almost predatory. Because humans have been observing your communications, your troop movements, your resource allocations. We've been inside your decision-making process since before it began. The implications of this statement sent shockwaves through the cabin. But more importantly, Sarah continued, we've been allowing it to proceed. Every communication, every coordination meeting, every strategic planning session has happened with our full knowledge and tacit permission. Our encryption protocols are quantum entangled. No external monitoring is possible. Not external monitoring, Sarah agreed. Internal cooperation. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop another 5 degrees. You see, humans learned something very important during our evolutionary development. The best way to defeat an alliance is to ensure that the alliance defeats itself. Warlord Scarix, your military planning assumes that human resistance will be minimal and that post-conquest resource allocation will be straightforward. But Pack Leader Ravish's territorial assessments overlap with your planned expansion zones by approximately 30%. Both predators turn to stare at each other with sudden suspicion. Similarly, Core Mine Zalith, your technological development projections assume access to human research data and infrastructure. But the Kythera consider that information a spoil of war belonging exclusively to the conquering forces. Zalith's glow began fluctuating in what appeared to be agitation. The beautiful thing about complex alliance structures, Sarah said conversationally, is that they're only stable when all parties believe they're getting the best possible deal. Once doubt enters the equation, she didn't need to finish the sentence. The 3 apex predators were already eyeing each other with growing hostility. Of course, Sarah added, almost as an afterthought, there's one more thing I should mention. The Peace Summit? It's not actually about territorial disputes or alliance politics. She closed her tablet and picked up her book again. It's about demonstrating that humanity doesn't need to fight wars to win them. Sometimes the most effective strategy is to let your enemies realize that they've already lost. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the revelation that Earth's children had learned to hunt not just in the darkness between worlds, but in the spaces between thoughts and the gaps between allies. The final 3 hours of the journey passed in stunned silence. The cabin's atmosphere had shifted from tension to something approaching reverent fear. The galaxy's apex predators found themselves contemplating the possibility that they had not only been outmaneuvered, but that the outmaneuvering had been so sophisticated they were only now beginning to understand its scope. As Nexus 7 approached the massive space station that would host the Peace Summit, Sarah Chen had returned to her book, reading quietly while 17 species of galactic predators wrestled with the implications of everything she had revealed. It was the ship's AI that finally broke the oppressive quiet. Attention, passengers! We are beginning final approach to Summit Station Concordia. Please prepare for docking procedures. Through the viewport, the station became visible as a gleaming structure of impossible size, its multiple arms extending into space like the spokes of a vast wheel. Ships from dozens of civilizations were already docked at various ports, their diverse designs creating a metallic garden of interstellar cooperation. Or so it appeared. Dr. Chin, Core Mine Zaleth's harmonic voice carried undertones of desperate curiosity. Before we disembark, I must ask, what happens now? If humanity has orchestrated this entire situation, what is the endgame? Sarah looked up from her book one final time, and her expression was somehow both gentle and inexorable. Endgame? That's an interesting way to phrase it, Ambassador. But this isn't the end of anything. If anything, it's the beginning. She closed her book and placed it carefully in her bag, each movement deliberate and final. You see, Every species in this cabin has spent the journey learning that humans are more dangerous than they initially appeared. But you've been learning the wrong lesson. She stood and moved to the viewport, gazing out at the massive station growing larger before them. The lesson isn't that humans are dangerous. The lesson is that humans understand danger differently than anyone else in the galaxy. Pack leader Ravacious hunting instincts compelled her to seek clarification even though part of her no longer wanted to know. What do you mean? Sarah turned back to face the cabin, and for the first time during the entire journey her expression was completely serious. Every species here evolved to be apex predators in environments with clearly defined threats. You developed strategies to defeat those threats, and those strategies served you well as you expanded into space. She began walking between the seats one final time, but her movement now carried an authority that made every predator unconsciously defer to her passage. But humans evolved in an environment where the primary threat was ourselves. Do you understand what that means? It means we didn't develop strategies to defeat external enemies. We developed strategies to defeat opponents who think exactly like we do. The implications of this crashed over the cabin like a wave. Every tactical approach your species might use against humanity has already been used by humans against other humans. Every psychological manipulation, every strategic deception, every form of warfare you might consider has been refined by thousands of years of human conflict. You're saying we can't defeat you because you've already defeated yourselves. I'm saying you can't surprise us because we've already surprised ourselves with every possible variation of strategy and counter-strategy, who had been silent throughout the entire journey. But here's the truly beautiful part of human strategic thinking. We learned something that no other species has discovered. The ultimate victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's making them want to become your allies. Ambassador Yex's voice was barely a whisper. The summit isn't about territorial disputes at all, is it? Sarah smiled, and this time the expression was warm, almost maternal. No, Ambassador. The summit is about demonstrating that cooperation with humanity is more profitable than opposition to humanity. She returned to her seat and began gathering her belongings. You see, every species represented here has territorial disputes with human-occupied space. But those territories aren't really disputed, are they? They're being systematically improved by human presence. Barren worlds becoming agricultural centers, worthless asteroids becoming mining bonanzas, impassable space phenomena becoming navigable trade routes. The truth began dawning on the assembled delegates. The question isn't whether you can take those territories from humanity. The question is whether you can afford to maintain them without human cooperation. Core Mind Zalath's harmonic frequencies had shifted to what could only be described as stunned realization. You've made yourselves indispensable, Sarah corrected. There's a difference. She stood as the ship began final docking maneuvers. Every species here will arrive at the summit with prepared demands for human territorial concessions. But during the next 3 days, you'll discover that human-occupied territories are generating resources and opportunities that benefit everyone in the region. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic clang that echoed through the cabin. You'll realize that demanding human withdrawal would eliminate those benefits. Instead, you'll find yourselves negotiating for increased cooperation, expanded trade agreements, technology sharing arrangements. She moved toward the cabin exit as the docking tube sealed with the ship's airlock. By the end of the summit, every species here will have signed agreements that make human space not just secure, but essential to your own civilization's prosperity. Ambassador Yex found her voice one final time. And if we refuse? If we maintain our demands for human withdrawal? Sarah paused at the exit, her hand on the control panel. Then you'll discover that humans are very good at making things stop working. But that won't be necessary, will it? Because every species here is intelligent enough to recognize a win-win scenario when they see one. She stepped into the docking tube, then turned back for one final statement. Welcome to humanity's vision of galactic cooperation, everyone. A future where the strongest predators are the ones smart enough to hunt together. As the cabin emptied and the delegates made their way towards Summit Station Concordia, each species found themselves contemplating the same unsettling realization. They had boarded Nexus 7 believing they were traveling to a negotiation where they held all the advantages. They were disembarking with the understanding that the negotiation had already concluded and they had agreed to terms they didn't even realize they had accepted. Behind them, the transport ship's systems recorded the conclusion of what human intelligence services would later classify as the Concordia Gambit, a diplomatic operation in which 17 potential enemy civilizations were converted to strategic allies during a single 17-hour journey, through nothing more than conversation and the careful revelation of information. In the depths of space, the stars continued their ancient dance, now illuminating not just the darkness between worlds, but the dawn of a new era in galactic politics. An era where the most dangerous predators were the ones who had learned that the deadliest hunt was the one where the prey never realized they were being hunted at all. And in a small cabin that had once held the galaxy's apex predators, a worn paperback copy of The Art of War lay forgotten on a seat, its pages still open to a chapter about winning without fighting. The human chapter of galactic history had begun not with conquest or domination, but with the quiet understanding that the most profound victories are the ones where everyone believes they won. In the silent corridors of space, Earth's children had taught the galaxy's greatest predators the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can encounter isn't another predator at all. Sometimes it's another prey animal that learned to think,